Well, hello and welcome to the United States Energy Association CEO Corner. This is a feature of ours where we interview CEOs of some of our members, and today we are delighted to have with us Debra Phillips, the President and CEO of the National Electrical Manufacturers Association. Welcome, Debra.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you so much for having me.
Well, the National Electrical Manufacturers Association, I know it's known as NEMA. Why don't you tell our viewers a little bit about your organization and its mission?
Sure. Actually, NEMA, the National Electrical Manufacturers Association, is 100 years old this year. We're celebrating our centennial. Yeah, it's quite a rich history. We were formed to serve the electrical industry. So electrical manufacturers from lighting products that are, kind of everywhere to motors, to wire and cable, to transformers, and everything in between. So we represent all of the electrical equipment that powers our world. And our mission is really threefold. We set standards for those technologies so that they can be used safely, efficiently, reliably, to make them interoperable with one to another. We also do market forecasts. We provide business intelligence, so our member companies can plan and invest and see what's coming around the corner in terms of market trends. And then we also advocate for public policy around those issues that affect the electrical industry.
Good. Well, we'll come back and talk about some of those topics. But you yourself, I know you were educated as a scientist. You worked in industry. You've held leadership positions at the American Chemistry Council, as well as the American Petroleum Institute.
Yep.
That's some unique experience. How do you see your experience serving you and your members at NEMA?
That's right. I am a scientist by training, an undergrad degree in biology and a graduate degree in environmental toxicology, actually, from Duke University. But I was hired out of grad school as an engineer. I was an environmental engineer in the pulp and paper industry. I worked for International Paper. And then I moved over and worked in the chemical industry for a number of years as an engineer. And then, found out there was this thing called trade associations. My company was part of the American Chemistry Council and was hired in over there to work on regulatory issues. Ended my career at ACC as vice president of sustainability and standards. So I spent a long time, learning about how trade associations work, how they serve an industry sector, which was amazing, and got to work for some amazing CEOs, including Jack Gerard and Cal Dooley, who was my boss for almost a decade. Took that experience over to API, and I ran their standards and revenue generating operations around certifications, global operations, and had the privilege of working with Jack Gerard again for a short period of time, and Mike Summers, which, was really as you said, a great set of experiences to bring to the electrical industry. So kind of my fourth sector of the economy. But, the electrical industry had been in a relatively steady state for almost 100 years. We went through an amazing period of electrification at the turn of the last century. And of course, there was a lot of exciting things happening at that time. But over the past several decades, it's been incremental change in our technology, but no longer. We're right in the middle of all of the digitalization of our infrastructure, the electrification of everything from industry to homes to appliances, the modernization of the grid, automation technologies, AI data centers. So it's an amazing time to be part of this industry and bring that understanding of the energy space and the advocacy space as a sector to an organization like NEMA.
Well, let's talk a little bit about the exciting times. So, big issue today, of course, is speed to power AI. Many of our, members produce electricity. They may be in generation, or they may be, those that need energy. With your organization, you actually create devices that make electricity available. And you had mentioned performance standards. And so we assume that you meet standards that the products that provide electricity have to meet. Today's push to increase more electricity, talk about how that impacts your members, and how with the performance standards, you're even able to keep up with that.
Yeah. Well, I think NEMA and the electrical industry as a whole is very fortunate to have a 100-year legacy of on standards. In fact, my organization was founded with a core mission of setting standards so that electrical equipment is safe, it's interoperable, it works with efficiency in mind. So we've been doing that for 100 years, and we've got a library of nearly 1,000 standards. But as you know, the standards world doesn't always operate at pace. It takes a long time for engineers to put their heads together and come up with, the standards that are going to work for equipment. But we no longer have that luxury of years' time to produce standards. So we've been really accelerating our process so that we can get standards out the door in a much shorter period of time. In fact, we've been busy over the last 9 months or so, putting together a set of data center standards, how electrical equipment needs to operate in a data center context. As you know, we're in the midst of building data centers. That technology is changing rapidly. A data center built today is very different than a data center built 3 years ago. And of course, efficiency and resource use in that in those data centers, it's really important, and that technology is evolving rapidly too. So we wanted to be able to contribute to that conversation. How can electrical equipment comprises about a third of a data center. So,
So
30%.
you're actually in the data center.
Oh yeah, all of the cooling equipment, all of the bringing the electrons into the facility, insulating materials. So we're 35% of that. And so what the standards do then is define how that equipment can be used safely in a data center context, how it can be used most efficiently, because we want to drive down, we want to make these data centers as efficient and effective as possible. And so anyway, the standard cycle is evolving along with the technology to produce those documents in a much faster pace.
Yeah, it seems. I recall my days at the Department of Energy with the appliance standards, statutory obligations. It just seemed as though you described the process. It seems we were always a little bit behind to try to actually meet the fairly aggressive goals. So I understand, the complicated nature of that. Well, let's talk too about some of the other policy issues. It sounds as though you described a membership and a process and equipment that depends on supply chains, U.S. Manufacturing, but potentially, trade issues. Do you want to talk a little bit about some of these other issues that, as an organization, you find that you have to address?
Sure. Yeah, policy issues are, at the heart of what we do as a trade association representing this industry. The priority for our companies, really since I joined NEMA almost 5 years ago, has been supply chain issues. When I joined, we were in the midst of COVID, and so we had chips. We use chips, and we use chips that tend to be large format chips, legacy chips. They're not sort of the new high tech chips that, for instance, the automotive industry purchases. So they're chips that are at that time were harder to get. They were harder to source. So we were very involved in those conversations. Electrical steel has been a constrained item. We use a lot of electrical steel in our applications, from motors to transformers, to switchgear, and we don't produce enough in this country for what we use. So we've been very active in those conversations about how do we take policy action to encourage more electrical steel production right here in the U.S. And then there's the issue of critical minerals and materials that this administration is focusing quite a lot on. We're not making enough here in the United States. China has really cornered the market on extraction, processing, recycling, financing, critical minerals production. So we've been part of those conversations that originated way back when we were still in the middle of COVID. And they're with us, but they're with us today in a different way. Now we're talking about domestic production of these materials, not because we're in a pandemic, but because we want to be competitive. We want the United States to be competitive from an energy standpoint, from a data center AI standpoint. And so trade policy is really having an effect on our industry. So we've been quite vocal with the administration about what materials are not currently domestically available. And so how do you create a nuanced trade policy that encourages their production here, but doesn't hinder progress on our energy, our data center, our U.S. manufacturing. I mentioned that electrical equipment is a huge part of a data center. It's also a huge part of a manufacturing facility. So we're trying to bring key equipment manufacturing back to the United States. Well, 20% of every manufacturing facility is electrical products. So, we want to do our part by bringing manufacturing back to the United States. We've invested about $200 billion since the first Trump administration. We think there's another $100 billion for this industry to invest over the next 5 years, but we need supply chain, trade and tariff policy that's going to encourage that investment. So we've been very active on trade and tariff issues recently. Permitting reform, we, like every industry that's involved in the energy industry, care quite a bit about permitting reform. We need to deploy grid infrastructure, manufacturing infrastructure faster. 10 years is too long to permit a new facility or a new transmission line. So we've got to do it. We've got to do it faster. So permitting reform has certainly been on our radar screen. But the other thing that we've been quite focused on is workforce. We can't find enough workers. That's actually a key part of the supply chain constraint story. Transformers have been getting a lot of airtime about, we don't have adequate supply of transformers. Well, one reason is because we can't run a third shift. We can't find workers to run a third shift to produce those transformers. But it's not just in the transformer space. It's across the electrical economy, from electricians to sales reps to those that are transporting product to manufacturing workers on the manufacturing floor. We're short workers. So trying to attract young people into this exciting and growing industry and advocating for policies that are going to support that is part of what we've been focusing on.
Well, it sounds like you've identified some of the jobs that AI is not going to be able to replace.
Yeah, that's right.
Right. So these are trades. These are VOTEC grads, but they're also engineers, and you said even sales reps.
Yep, absolutely. I mean, this is a growing industry. We don't see an end in sight to the growth, so we're talking decades. So these are not just jobs; they're careers, and because there's a variety of skills that we're looking for. We think that that's part of what makes that career journey exciting. You can move from one thing you can start in manufacturing, but move to sales, or move to even running your own business if you're an electrical contractor. So we've been really trying to get the word out that this is a growing sector, and we need policies to support bringing young people into it.
So can you talk a little bit about some policies that you might support to help this, because workforce has been an issue for some time, and I know Congress is always looking for help, if you will, in what are some policies that could facilitate inducing people to to go into this line of work. I'm just curious, what are some of the
two things come to mind. So the White House has recently announced an expansion of their apprenticeship program, so that would be extremely helpful for those that are interested in coming into the electrical trades. And we work very closely with our partners at NECA, the National Electrical Contractors Association. They've got fast-tracked learning platforms to bring folks into their apprenticeship program. There's also pieces of legislation. The VETS Act is one that we've supported to try to bring veterans into these skilled electrical jobs. Veterans often have this type of training that's easily transferable into the electrical industry. So those are two key policy measures that we've been supporting.
Well, it sounds like such a broad set of issues that you're involved in. I mean, you've talked about trade, you've talked about energy policy, you've talked about workforce, critical minerals and materials, tariffs, etc. Does your organization file comments typically with regulatory bodies to help inform and enlighten regulations?
Yes, of course. We've been quite active over the years with the Department of Energy and EPA on efficiency standards. So our member companies, for instance, manufacture lighting products that fall under those efficiency regulations, motors, transformers that fall under those efficiency regulations. So we've been very active in those policy making processes. We've been very active with the Department of Commerce. In fact, we were in meetings just last week with senior members of the administration around trade and tariff measures and how they're impacting our industry and how we can potentially take a more nuanced approach to encourage progress on those issues that the electrical industry is an enabler for, whether that's data centers, AI, whether that's the oil and gas manufacturing, whether that's U.S. Manufacturing facilities. So taking a more nuanced approach. And we've seen this administration do that with other industries like the pharmaceutical industry, for instance, for the automotive industry. So we think that there's a way that we could look at the electrical industry as some of those other economic enabling sectors. So quite active there with Treasury on some of the tax credits. We were quite involved in some of those tax credits. Yeah, advanced manufacturing, even some of the clean energy tax credits. We have EV manufacturers within our membership as well. So we've been quite active there. So we're really raising the voice of this industry during this critical time because of the role it plays in meeting these priorities.
Oh, that's quite a variety of different agencies that you have to cover. I know, too, we're all expecting FERC, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, to take some action on its large load advance notice of rulemaking. And I was just curious, is that something you all would get involved in?
Yeah, we engage with FERC, I think, on a more limited basis than some of our other, peer trade groups that are more active with the utility sector. So at times we'll engage with FERC on rulemakings, but by and large we're Department of Energy, Department of Commerce, Department of Transportation, Treasury focused.
Yeah, I mean, so much of what you do and so much of the future of energy use, and particularly electricity, is on innovation. And of course, your organization plays that key role because, as innovative as some new technologies are, certainly in the world of electricity, you need to meet standards. So I know we come back to that. So you play that key role, but as you've explained, you do more than that. And so you have a big role in influencing policy, educating policymakers, and putting forth, some sensible solutions. So
maybe I could talk a little bit about an area where we're sort of playing between those lines, the standards role and the policy role, and I think it's quite unique. Under the bipartisan infrastructure law and the trillions of dollars that were sent into the economy to modernize our infrastructure, about a third of that package was electrical equipment. And you might recall that there were some strings attached to those dollars related to domestic content of the investment. And because we are the electrical industry was such a large part of that package, our manufacturers were really trying to understand what compliance with those domestic content requirements look like. It was called Build America, Buy America, BABA, under that statute, but it actually applies more broadly than just that statute, those domestic content requirements. So we actually put our heads together and came up with a standard that describes how to meet those domestic content requirements, both at a facility level, but also down to the product level. So, at a low voltage distribution equipment level, this is how you would assess a piece of equipment for meeting those domestic content requirements. And then we launched a certification program that certifies facilities and products for meeting those domestic content requirements. We call it Make It American. And it serves the purpose of allowing regulators and entities that are sending dollars into the economy to identify those products that meet those domestic content requirements, but it also provides our members assurance that they're using the right processes to evaluate their components for domestic content. So we think this is particularly useful during this time when we're thinking about making more here. We're thinking about especially grid sensitive products, where the origins of those supply chains lie. And as we're investing in U.S. infrastructure, being able to to identify those products that meet those requirements. So it's kind of a marrying of a policy agenda, a policy requirement, and some of our technical standards acumen to try to serve that need.
Well, and Deborah, if I can just talk a little bit more about that and use an example. I know, again, while I was at Department of Energy, it became apparent to us that we were dependent on certain countries, that didn't share our same values to make things like, um, transformers
Yes.
that we had to. And then, um, and as you looked at the technology that was deployed, a lot of the inverters, certainly for solar panels and inverter-based industries or resources, rather, much like what NERC has identified as some of the vulnerabilities. So anything that uses inverters, we get a lot of our, we import a lot of our inverters, and of course that's a key both for operation but also for security issues. So um, this is, you know, sort of at the intersection of where technology, where it's produced and how it's applied and it operates is key for our national electrical grid, but also for national security. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, well, I mean, you're absolutely right to make that linkage. I think more and more, um, you know, putting U.S. government domestic content requirements aside, I think anyone who's purchasing equipment is starting to pay a lot more attention to where it comes from and to assessing those supply chains, for a lot of reasons, for trade and tariff reasons, but also for security reasons. I hear that quite a bit when I'm out talking about how we see the grid space, how we see electrical demand growing, the technologies that we want to bring to bear to help not only on the generation side but on the efficiency side. I hear from utilities that they're very cognizant of where they're purchasing their materials and where those supply chains, the roots of those supply chains. And so the program that we've developed is aimed at trying to provide more assurances around where those products come from, making sure that companies, especially the electrical companies that are serving into these grid, security sensitive applications, they have the processes in place to do their due diligence around where their supply chains, where are the roots of their supply chains as they're procuring materials to go into these grid applications. So we see this as part of the future. We developed the program for a very specific purpose under the BABA regulations, but we see its application of supply chain vulnerability, supply chain analysis, supply chain understanding, extending for these very reasons that you're bringing up about, we want to make sure, especially in grid sensitive, national security sensitive applications, that we fully understand where we're sourcing these materials.
So it sounds like as if you're a necessary and indispensable resource for not only Department of Energy, but also, DHS, probably DOD. I can only imagine, the breadth of where your expertise is influential and informative at these other agencies. And I know your organization is called the National Electrical Manufacturers Association, but it struck me listening to you too that if I were a state regulator, uh, the decisions that I would have to make, I'm curious. Can you describe a little bit about your relationships, maybe with with states, with the state commissions, maybe with state energy offices, and
Sure.
maybe with the National Association of Regulatory Utility Commissioners?
Sure. So we have those relationships at state level as well, because there's decisions being made about investment, but there's also decisions being made at state level around code, energy codes, electrical codes. So we do quite a bit of work at state level to advocate for adoption of the most recent codes, whether that's in the energy or electrical code space. We work with energy commissioners around those efficiency technologies that we bring to bear. We also get engaged at state level on efficiency regulation on the regulatory side. So, and sometimes issues like extended producer responsibility, sort of end of life issues for electrical. You think about batteries or light bulbs. So we get involved on a variety of issues at state and local level as well.
Well, Deborah, you had mentioned that your organization is now 100 years old. This, of course, congratulations,
Thank
by the
you.
way, on achieving that milestone. It also falls at the time where the United States is commemorating its 250th year of the signing of the Declaration of Independence. Um, so I'm just curious, have you had a chance to reflect back on your organization and what it's accomplished, and maybe to reflect upon its value today, and then looking forward
Mm.
over the next decades to come? How do you see your organization fulfilling a leadership role there?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's a 100-year legacy that we're very proud of. The rich history of bringing, really illuminating this country. That's really where this all started. But of course, over the last 100 years, we've grown, well beyond that. We're powering homes, we're powering hospitals, we're powering industry, we're securing and expanding the grid. So, when we think about that rich history, the legacy of setting standards that keep us safe and make us more efficient, but we're now at the intersection of just about every macro trend, whether it's energy security, whether it's data centers and AI, whether it's even sustainability and climate issues. This industry is helping us identify those opportunities to lower emissions, lower and lighten our footprint. So, we see ourselves as contributing to those goals. We're sort of the hidden backbone, of the cars we drive, the homes we live in, the hospitals that we go to serve our health needs, the industry that's powering this country. And so we're really proud of being sort of that hidden part of what makes this country run. And I think we're also going to be those keys to unlocking those challenges of the future, playing that kind of behind the scenes enabler role. So we're very excited not only about what we've done over the last century, but what stands before us over the next.
Well, congratulations really on what you've accomplished and the mission going forward. And if our viewers and listeners wanted to learn more about your organization, you would direct them to your website.
Yep, makeitelectric.org. Please,
electric.org.
Make It Electric is our tagline. We rebranded a couple of years ago, and so the new website reflects that vision of making and electrifying the economy. So www.makeitelectric.org.
All one word.
All one word. You got
Excellent.
it.
Fantastic. Well, this has truly been enlightening, but edifying, educational as well. Uh, and this is, again, one of our series of CEO Corners with the United States Energy Association. And if you wish to learn more about the United States Energy Association, I invite you to visit our website at usea.org. And if you like what you see, please consider joining and being a member and supporting our mission. With that, this concludes today's CEO Corner with Debra Phillips of the National Electrical Manufacturers Association. Thank you, Debra.
Thank you so much, Mark. Thanks, everyone.